In the cold dawn of January 1942, the skies over the English Channel were quietly alive with the hum of aircraft engines, yet few would ever know of the missions taking place. While the world focused on the grand battles of the Western Front and North Africa, the Royal Air Force was engaged in a far more secretive and perilous endeavor: experimental test flights of cutting-edge fighter aircraft and radar technology. These missions, undertaken by the elite pilots of No. 616 Squadron and No. 504 Squadron, were designed to push the boundaries of aviation and air combat intelligence, but they came with an almost unimaginable risk. Only a small circle within the Air Ministry and the Ministry of Aircraft Production knew the full extent of the operations, and the pilots themselves were briefed only with fragments of information, enough to fly, fight, and return, or so the planners hoped. The stakes were immediate and intense. The Channel, a narrow yet treacherous stretch of water separating England from the occupied continent, was a testing ground like no other. Pilots navigated biting winds and sudden fog banks, often at perilously low altitudes to simulate enemy attack profiles. Each mission involved aircraft prototypes, advanced versions of the Spitfire and the Hawker Hurricane, equipped with experimental radar and high-speed communication devices. These components had never been tested under the stresses of real-world conditions, and their failures could be fatal. On January 12, 1942, Flight Lieutenant Charles Havers of No. 504 Squadron embarked on one such test in a modified Spitfire MKV. Within minutes, his radio went silent, and his plane disappeared into the gray winter mist, leaving behind only the faint echo of an engine over the cold waters. It was a grim signal that these missions were far more dangerous than routine patrols or dogfights. The human element of the story is perhaps the most compelling. Pilots were acutely aware that they were guinea pigs in what some would later call Britain's experimental crucible. Flight diaries recovered from surviving airmen reveal the tension that permeated each sortie. Flying Officer Peter Hawthorne wrote, "You climb into the cockpit knowing you may never see the airfield again, yet you fly as if nothing could touch you. The machines themselves feel alive, beautiful, precise, yet deadly if you falter." The squadron commanders were under equal pressure, balancing the lives of their men against the urgent need for intelligence and technological superiority. The RAF's top brass had learned hard lessons from the Battle of Britain. The Channel could no longer be seen merely as a defensive barrier; it was a proving ground, a laboratory, and a graveyard. Technical failures were frequent and often mystifying. On February 3, 1942, a No. 616 Squadron Spitfire Mk9, fitted with a prototype AIMK-8 radar, lost electrical power mid-flight while tracking a simulated enemy formation. The pilot, Flight Lieutenant James Harrow, radioed a terse, panicked message: "Systems failing, can't hold altitude." Moments later, contact was lost entirely. The radar units, intended to give RAF pilots an advantage in low-visibility combat, seemed almost cursed in their early iterations, and maintenance crews struggled to diagnose malfunctions that only appeared in midair. These failures were compounded by the secrecy surrounding the missions. Ground engineers could only speculate on issues they were never fully briefed to understand, and pilots could neither verify nor fix the faults mid-flight. Each mission became a delicate dance between human skill, mechanical reliability, and the unforgiving English Channel. Adding to the tension was the shadow of potential enemy observation. Although the Luftwaffe was heavily engaged elsewhere, the possibility of German reconnaissance over the Channel loomed large. Mission planners worried that any lost aircraft, or even partially observed test patterns, could be exploited by the enemy. Intercepted communications suggested that some German units were indeed tracking unusual flight profiles over the Channel, heightening the paranoia among squadron leaders. Orders were issued to vary altitudes, flight paths, and times, yet even these precautions offered only limited security. Every sortie carried not just the risk of mechanical failure or weather, but the hidden threat of exposure to the enemy. Despite these challenges, the RAF pressed on. These early test missions were the crucible in which future wartime aviation strategy would be forged. They revealed weaknesses in aircraft design, gaps in pilot training, and the unpredictable nature of new radar systems. Yet, for every success there was a loss: a plane that never returned, a pilot whose fate remained a haunting mystery. Flight Lieutenant Harrow's disappearance over the Channel became a symbol of both bravery and the inherent danger of pushing technological and tactical boundaries during war. Families, squadron mates, and commanders were left with questions that had no answers, the kind that linger long after the engines fell silent. As January 1942 drew to a close, the secret missions continued, each flight leaving behind more questions than answers. reports were filed, fragments of crashed aircraft were recovered, and the brave men of No. 616 and No. 504 squadrons pressed onward, driven by duty, curiosity, and the unspoken understanding that these flights could be their last. The Channel had become both a laboratory and a tomb, a place where innovation collided with uncertainty. What remained unknown was whether these missions would ultimately yield the knowledge needed to tip the balance of aerial warfare, or if the losses would become yet another tragic chapter in the story of Britain's air efforts. The stage was set for a year of mysterious disappearances, technical revelations, and the ongoing struggle to master the skies above the Channel, a struggle that would test the limits of human courage and mechanical ingenuity. And so, the story of these lost RAF test missions had only just begun, leaving the question hanging over every subsequent flight: who would return and who would be lost forever? By the spring of 1942, the mystery of the missing RAF test flights over the English Channel had grown urgent. Reports from the No. 504 and No. 616 squadrons revealed a disturbing pattern. Several aircraft vanished mid-flight without a trace, leaving behind no debris, no survivors, and no clear explanation. These were not ordinary combat losses. Each mission was carefully planned, often taking place in daylight under relatively calm weather. Yet pilots like Flight Lieutenant James Harrow, Flight Lieutenant Charles Havers, and Flying Officer Peter Hawthorne had disappeared despite following every protocol. The question haunting the RAF was no longer whether these missions were dangerous, they clearly were, but why, exactly, the losses were happening with such consistency. The human cost was immediate and visceral. Families waited anxiously for news that never came, while squadron members carried a growing sense of unease. The Channel, which had served as a routine patrol boundary during the Battle of Britain, had become a zone of inexplicable disappearance. Witness accounts from ground crews and radar operators painted a grim picture. Pilots would take off, report normal conditions, and then suddenly radio transmissions would cease. On May 18, 1942, radar operators at RAF Manston recorded the final signals from a modified Spitfire Mk9 belonging to No. 504 Squadron. The aircraft's signal grew faint and erratic until it vanished entirely, leaving the airfield in stunned silence. Investigators were left with only the haunting, unresolved trace of a plane that had simply ceased to exist. Investigations began in earnest. Engineers and intelligence officers from the Ministry of Aircraft Production reviewed maintenance logs, pilot records, and experimental blueprints. They found several inconsistencies, particularly in the new radar-equipped Spitfires. Electrical faults had been reported repeatedly, though none had been considered critical until now. Flight engineers noted that the AIMK-8 radar units were prone to complete shutdown under certain stress conditions, particularly in cold, damp air over the Channel. But while mechanical failure explained some losses, others remained inexplicable. Pilots had often been highly experienced, and many flights had involved routine maneuvers. Something more subtle, possibly a combination of human error and experimental design, seemed to be at work. Adding to the tension was speculation about sabotage or enemy observation. The possibility that German intelligence could be monitoring these test missions weighed heavily on RAF planners. Intercepted communications suggested that the Luftwaffe had taken an interest in unusual flight patterns over the Channel, raising the disturbing question: had these lost missions been compromised from the start? Flight logs included encrypted notes from squadron commanders: ensure no pattern repeats over same sector. Enemy attention likely. The implication was clear. The RAF feared that every lost aircraft could have been an intelligence windfall for the Germans, revealing the vulnerabilities of British experimental technology. The psychological strain on the pilots themselves was equally severe. Diaries and letters reveal a mix of courage, dread, and resignation. Flying Officer Hawthorne wrote in March 1942, "Each time we climb, I feel the weight of unseen eyes upon us. The machines may fail, but so may we, and either failure is unforgiving." Even the most seasoned aviators knew that a single misjudged maneuver, a sudden mechanical failure, or an unnoticed weather shift could end their life in seconds. Yet there was no choice but to continue. The intelligence these missions promised was considered vital to future RAF operations, particularly in countering Luftwaffe innovations in radar and night fighter tactics. The losses mounted, and with them a growing sense of urgency. By June 14, 1942, Flight Lieutenant James Harrow's disappearance over the Channel became emblematic of the unsolved crisis. Harrow had been an exemplary pilot with numerous combat victories during the Battle of Britain, yet on this routine test mission, his plane was never seen again. Recovery teams scoured the Channel waters, deploying divers and reconnaissance launches, but the cold currents and deep undercurrents made locating wreckage almost impossible. The incident fueled speculation within the RAF and intelligence circles alike. Were these disappearances purely accidental, the result of mechanical flaws, or was there a hidden factor, environmental, human, or otherwise, that eluded even the most experienced investigators? Amid the growing mysteries, the RAF faced the difficult task of maintaining morale while continuing dangerous operations. Squadron briefings became somber affairs, with pilots acutely aware of the stakes. Commanders emphasized caution, yet also reminded their men that these flights were necessary to secure Britain's future in the air. Every test flight represented both hope and risk. Hope that the experimental aircraft would succeed, and risk that the Channel would claim another of Britain's finest. The duality of bravery and uncertainty permeated every sortie, leaving a lingering tension that never fully dissipated. As May and June drew to a close, the RAF was left with an unsettling truth. Some aircraft could not be accounted for, some pilots would never be found, and the exact reasons for the losses remained elusive. The combination of experimental machinery, challenging weather, and potential enemy observation created a perfect storm of mystery and danger. The story of these missing pilots was no longer just about technical failure, it had become a tale of human courage tested against the unknown. Questions lingered. Could the failures be corrected, or were they an inevitable cost of wartime experimentation? And, most hauntingly, how many more would disappear before the Channel finally yielded its secrets? With each unanswered question, the shadow of uncertainty deepened over the Channel. The missions were far from over, and the RAF knew that each sortie carried the same peril that had already claimed several skilled pilots. The stage was set for a detailed investigation, one that would begin to unravel both the mechanical and human elements behind these mysterious losses, while keeping alive the ever-present tension that defined Britain's most secretive operations. By mid-1942, the pattern of disappearances over the English Channel had forced the Ministry of Aircraft Production to take unprecedented action. The losses of highly trained pilots from No. 504 and No. 616 squadrons were no longer anomalies, they were a pressing operational concern. The RAF began systematically examining the aircraft themselves, focusing on the prototypes used in these test missions. Spitfire MKIXs and Hawker Hurricanes fitted with experimental AIMK-8 radar units were carefully deconstructed, yet each inspection seemed to raise more questions than answers. Pilots and engineers alike described a sense of unease, as if these machines were capable of failure in ways that no amount of maintenance could predict. The very technology designed to give Britain an edge in air combat was, paradoxically, a source of mortal danger to its own aviators. The challenges were immediate and multifaceted. Flight Lieutenant Richard Connolly, an experienced pilot of No. 616 Squadron, recalled one particularly harrowing sortie on July 8, 1942. We were meant to simulate a low-level interception. I felt the plane's controls stiffen as we descended into the mist. The radar flickered, then died. I fought to maintain control, knowing that even a minor error could send us into the Channel. These mechanical failures were often sudden and unpredictable. Engineers traced some of the malfunctions to the high-voltage components of the radar units, which occasionally overheated or short-circuited during cold, damp flights. Others were related to the airframe itself. Prototype modifications had sometimes introduced structural weaknesses in the wings and fuselage, which became critical under the stress of low-altitude maneuvers. As the investigation deepened, the RAF discovered that the experimental systems were far more temperamental than previously realized. A report from the Ministry of Aircraft Production dated August 1942 noted, "Prototypes demonstrate sporadic electrical failure. Radar units function reliably only under specific atmospheric conditions. Pilots must be warned of potential total system shutdown at low altitude." The language was clinical, but the implications were dire. Each flight carried the risk not just of mission failure but of catastrophic loss of life. Pilots were being asked to operate machines that were simultaneously cutting-edge and dangerously incomplete, a delicate balance between innovation and mortality. The human toll added another layer of complexity. Diaries and letters from squadron members reveal a mix of professional pride and personal anxiety. Flying Officer Thomas Whitaker wrote in his journal on August 15, 1942, "Every time I strap in, I think of Harrow, of Havers. They vanished into the gray waters, leaving only the echo of their engines. We are testing technology, yes, but it feels like testing fate itself." Ground crews too were aware of the risk. They labored under secrecy, performing meticulous inspections on components they did not fully understand, knowing that any oversight could result in tragedy. The tension was palpable at every airfield, from RAF Manston to RAF Hornchurch, as men and machines were pushed to the limits of endurance. Adding to the mystery was the realization that some failures could not be explained by engineering alone. Certain aircraft experienced sudden power loss even after thorough pre-flight checks, while others exhibited unexpected behavior in flight logs that suggested subtle aerodynamic issues. Flight engineers speculated that environmental factors over the channel, strong winds, microturbulence, and low cloud cover, were interacting with the experimental systems in unpredictable ways. Even the most experienced pilots were unable to anticipate these anomalies, which made every mission a trial by both technology and nature. The channel itself seemed to conspire against them, a cold, gray expanse that swallowed planes without leaving a trace. The RAF also had to contend with the strategic implications of these failures. Intelligence reports hinted that the Luftwaffe may have been observing some of the lost missions, recording flight paths and perhaps gaining insights into British experimental aircraft. Although no direct evidence of sabotage was found, the possibility of enemy observation added urgency to the investigations. Orders were issued to vary flight schedules and patterns, to limit the predictability of the tests. Yet even these precautions could not eliminate the inherent danger. A malfunction, a sudden weather change, or a momentary lapse in judgment could still prove fatal. Despite these setbacks, the RAF pressed on. Each recovered aircraft, each debriefing, and each reconstructed flight offered lessons that were invaluable to the war effort. By late summer 1942, engineers had begun to identify patterns. Certain radar components failed consistently under high humidity, specific airframe modifications caused wing vibrations at low altitudes, and pilot error was often exacerbated by unfamiliar equipment. While these insights promised future safety improvements, the lessons came at a human cost. Pilots like Harrow and Havers were remembered not only for their bravery but as cautionary examples of the thin margin between innovation and disaster. As the investigation proceeded, a sense of foreboding lingered over every sortie. The channel had become both a laboratory and a graveyard, a place where advanced technology, human skill, and environmental unpredictability collided. The RAF had begun to understand the sources of failure, yet some mysteries remained unsolved. Certain losses could not be fully explained, leaving an unresolved tension that hovered over squadron briefings and mission planning. The stage was set for the next phase of investigation, a broader look at whether these accidents were entirely mechanical, environmental, or possibly influenced by external observation. The question that haunted the RAF throughout the summer of 1942 remained: could these experimental missions be made truly safe, or was the channel destined to continue claiming Britain's bravest aviators in pursuit of technological supremacy? The answers would begin to emerge in the months ahead, but for now, every test flight was still a dance with the unknown, and every disappearance a reminder of the high stakes of wartime innovation. By late 1942, the secret of RAF test missions over the English Channel had entered a phase fraught with both technical and strategic tension. What had begun as experimental flights to test prototype Spitfires and Hawker Hurricanes, equipped with advanced radar units, was now shadowed by the looming specter of enemy observation. Intercepted German communications hinted that the Luftwaffe had become aware of unusual patterns of flight over the channel, raising fears that these missions were no longer private laboratories but potential intelligence gold mines for Hitler's forces. Squadron commanders grew increasingly cautious, aware that every sortie carried not only the risk of mechanical failure and environmental danger but also the possibility of exposing Britain's technological secrets to the enemy. The pilots themselves were keenly aware of the stakes. Flight Lieutenant Richard Connolly of No. 616 Squadron recorded in his diary on October 3, 1942, "We fly like ghosts over the channel. One mistake and we vanish not just from the sky but possibly into enemy hands. We are testing machines, yes, but also our own courage." These flights demanded extreme precision, low-altitude navigation to simulate enemy engagement, careful monitoring of experimental radar units, and rapid response to sudden mechanical anomalies. Yet despite the pilot's skill, aircraft continued to disappear under circumstances that defied easy explanation. On October 12, a modified Spitfire Mk9, piloted by Flying Officer Thomas Whitaker, vanished after reporting an electrical failure over the Dover Strait. No wreckage was recovered, and the radio silence that followed added to the mounting anxiety within the RAF. The Ministry of Aircraft Production responded by dispatching a team of engineers and intelligence officers to scrutinize both aircraft and flight protocols. They discovered recurring faults in the AIMK-8 radar units and electrical systems, which often malfunctioned in the cold, damp channel air. Structural stress on the modified wings and airframes exacerbated the problem, creating unpredictable in-flight behavior. Yet the most troubling revelation was the possibility of German reconnaissance. Photographic and radio intercepts suggested that Luftwaffe aircraft may have monitored some test missions, potentially mapping flight patterns and observing experimental technology. While there was no concrete evidence that these missions had been compromised, the very possibility injected a new layer of urgency and paranoia into RAF operations. This pressure reverberated through the ranks. Pilots faced the dual challenge of surviving the experimental flights themselves and maintaining operational security. On October 19, 1942, Squadron Leader John R. Pritchard briefed his men. "Remember, lads, the channel is more than water, it is a stage for the enemy's eyes. Fly with precision, but be aware that each maneuver may be watched. Your skill and your silence are as important as your aircraft's performance." Such directives underscored the delicate balance between human decision-making, mechanical reliability, and strategic necessity. Every flight was a high-stakes exercise in both aviation and intelligence discipline, where one lapse could have consequences far beyond the immediate loss of an aircraft or pilot. Meanwhile, ground crews struggled to adapt to the evolving demands of the test missions. Maintenance teams at RAF Manston and Hornchurch were tasked with inspecting components they had never fully seen before. Electrical engineers reported that certain radar circuits would fail only under flight conditions that could not be simulated on the ground. Airframe specialists noted microfractures and wing spars of prototypes, which were nearly invisible until stressed in high-speed maneuvers. Recovery and analysis of wreckage from lost flights yielded fragments that told partial stories, twisted metal, burnt wiring, but never enough to conclusively explain the disappearances. The channel, with its murky depths and treacherous currents, had become a formidable barrier to understanding, obscuring the final moments of aircraft and their pilots alike. The combination of technical unpredictability and potential enemy observation forced the RAF to implement new protocols. Flight paths were varied, departure times were randomized, and radio communications were encrypted and limited. Pilots were trained to respond to equipment failure with emergency procedures specifically designed for low-altitude survival over water. Yet, despite these measures, the losses continued. In November 1942, Flight Lieutenant James Collier's Spitfire vanished during a night trial simulating a low-visibility interception. Radar logs showed sudden signal dropout, but no trace of the aircraft or pilot could be found. The incident intensified speculation. Were these failures purely mechanical, or was some other factor, environmental, human, or intelligence-related, contributing to the disappearances? As the year drew to a close, the RAF was forced to confront a sobering reality. Even with extensive analysis, modifications, and precautions, certain mysteries of the channel could not be fully controlled. The combination of high-risk experimental technology, unpredictable environmental conditions, and the specter of enemy observation created an atmosphere of sustained tension. Every test flight was a calculated gamble, a balance between innovation and survival. The pilots who flew these missions were celebrated for their courage, yet many vanished into a silence that the channel jealously guarded. The stage was set for the next chapter, the physical recovery and forensic reconstruction of lost aircraft, a painstaking effort that would reveal clues and raise more questions about the repeated failures that had haunted Britain's top squadrons. In the shadow of this uncertainty, the channel remained both laboratory and enigma. For engineers, commanders, and pilots, each flight was a test not just of technology but of human endurance and tactical acumen. The mysteries of the lost RAF missions loomed larger than ever, a reminder that in wartime, innovation often walks hand in hand with danger, and that the answers to these enigmas could lie submerged beneath cold waters, waiting to be uncovered. By early 1943, the RAF faced the monumental task of uncovering what had gone wrong with the lost test missions over the English Channel. After nearly a year of disappearances, mechanical failures, and unexplained vanishing acts, the Ministry of Aircraft Production authorized extensive recovery operations. Divers, small naval launches, and reconnaissance boats were dispatched to the channel to locate wreckage from missing Spitfires and Hurricanes. The waters were cold, often choppy and treacherous, with strong currents that carried debris far from its point of impact. For families, engineers, and squadron members, the recovery efforts were both a glimmer of hope and a source of renewed anxiety. Each recovered fragment might hold answers or only deepen the mystery. The physical recovery of aircraft proved arduous and revealing. On February 2, 1943, a diver located the remnants of Flight Lieutenant James Collier's Spitfire near the Dover Strait. The wreckage was scattered over several hundred meters, with the fuselage partially buried in the sand and radar equipment corroded by saltwater. Engineers immediately noted signs of structural failure. Wing spars twisted unnaturally and control surfaces were jammed in mid-flight positions. The AIMK-8 radar unit, critical to the mission's objective, showed evidence of electrical burnout. Investigators began piecing together a clearer picture. Mechanical failure, compounded by environmental stressors and the challenges of prototype design, had been responsible for several of the losses. Yet some elements of the aircraft remained inexplicably missing, leaving key questions unanswered. The human element remained central to the narrative. Pilots who survived similar missions recalled the extreme tension of low-altitude flights over water. Flying Officer Thomas Whitaker, who had narrowly survived a prototype test in December 1942, described the experience. Flying that close to the channel is like balancing on the edge of a knife. The slightest miscalculation and there is no margin for error. Every system on the plane must function perfectly, and even then, the sea is unforgiving. The recovery of wreckage offered a tangible connection to those who had vanished, providing clues not only about technical failures but also about the intense physical and psychological pressures these pilots faced. Diaries and letters indicated that fear, fatigue, and heightened vigilance were constant companions, shaping the outcomes of every flight. The investigations also highlighted subtle flaws in the experimental aircraft themselves. Recovered components showed inconsistencies in radar calibration, wiring, and structural modifications that were difficult to detect in pre-flight inspections. Some failures were directly linked to stress fractures in wings and fuselage caused by repeated high-speed maneuvers. Other issues emerged from exposure to moisture and salt air, which corroded critical electrical systems. In some cases, components had been rushed into service due to wartime urgency, leaving pilots to contend with untested systems in highly unpredictable conditions. The recovery operations underscored a sobering reality. Innovation in wartime often comes at the cost of trial, error, and sometimes lives. Yet even with the wreckage recovered, mysteries persisted. Certain radar units and aircraft fragments remained missing, as if swallowed by the channel itself. In one notable instance, the remains of a No. 504 Squadron Hurricane were located, but the AIMK-8 radar unit was nowhere to be found, despite careful surveying of the site. Engineers speculated that powerful currents could have carried components far from the main wreckage, or that secondary mechanical failures might have caused parts to detach mid-crash. These unresolved gaps in evidence left investigators cautious, aware that their conclusions, while grounded in observed data, could not account for every disappearance. The recovery effort also shed light on the broader implications of the test missions. Structural and mechanical weaknesses identified in the wreckage prompted immediate design revisions, improved maintenance protocols, and enhanced pilot training. Lessons learned from these operations would influence subsequent RAF aircraft development and combat strategies, particularly in low-visibility operations over water. Yet even as progress was made, the specter of uncertainty remained. Some of the lost pilots, including Flight Lieutenant James Harrow, remained unaccounted for, leaving families, squadrons, and historians to grapple with the human cost of experimental aviation during wartime. By the end of March 1943, the recovery operations had provided partial answers but reinforced the sense of enduring mystery. Pilots, engineers, and commanders now understood more about the mechanical and environmental factors contributing to the losses, yet some disappearances remained unexplained. The channel had delivered both evidence and enigma, revealing the dangers of prototype testing while protecting its deepest secrets. The investigations illuminated patterns of failure, but they also underscored the bravery and resilience of the men who flew these missions, knowing full well the risks involved. Each recovered aircraft told a story of innovation, courage, and sacrifice, but also hinted at questions that might never be answered. As Britain prepared for a pivotal year in the air war, the RAF faced a sobering truth. The Channel's lost missions were not merely historical footnotes, they were lessons etched in steel and human memory. The recovered fragments informed safer practices and stronger designs, yet the mystery of the missing components, vanished pilots, and unexplained failures lingered. These unresolved elements ensured that the story of the lost RAF test missions would remain a blend of engineering triumph and haunting uncertainty, a testament to the perilous intersection of human skill, mechanical innovation, and the unforgiving environment of wartime aviation. The stage was now set for reflection, analysis, and the slow revelation of patterns that would ultimately define the RAF's approach to experimental operations and technological advancement. By mid-1943, after months of recovery, analysis, and painstaking reconstruction, the story of the lost RAF test missions over the English Channel began to coalesce into a clearer, though still incomplete, picture. What emerged was a tapestry of human bravery, technological experimentation, and wartime secrecy, where lessons were learned at a high cost and questions remained unresolved. While some losses could now be attributed to mechanical failures, structural weaknesses, or environmental hazards, others remained enigmas, swallowed by the cold, gray waters of the Channel. Pilots and engineers alike were forced to confront the sobering reality that experimentation during wartime was both vital and inherently dangerous, and that some sacrifices were beyond calculation or prevention. The surviving documentation revealed recurring patterns in the failures of the AIMK-8 radar units and other experimental systems. Engineers concluded that a combination of design flaws, stress-related fractures in airframes, and exposure to damp, salty conditions had contributed to most of the mechanical losses. Yet even with this understanding, certain disappearances, such as that of Flight Lieutenant James Harrow, remained unresolved. Reconstructions of flight paths suggested that some aircraft may have experienced sudden, catastrophic malfunctions, while others might have been lost to unexpected turbulence or other environmental anomalies. The Channel had become both a proving ground and a tomb, exacting a heavy toll on Britain's most skilled and courageous pilots. Pilots who survived these missions were forever changed. Diaries and letters from mid-1943 reflect the emotional and psychological impact of flying experimental aircraft under such perilous conditions. Flying Officer Thomas Whitaker wrote, "Every time I take off, I carry the weight of those who didn't return. The machines we test are beautiful, deadly, and merciless. We fly not for glory, but because someone must understand the skies before the enemy does." Their experiences underscored a truth recognized by RAF Command. Innovation demanded risk, and risk was inseparable from the process of securing Britain's technological and strategic advantage in the air. The recovery and analysis of wreckage also had a lasting operational impact. The RAF implemented design modifications to prevent structural failures, improved maintenance and inspection protocols, and developed enhanced pilot training programs to account for the peculiarities of experimental equipment. Lessons learned during these operations informed the deployment of later aircraft, such as the fully operational Spitfire MKIXs and early jet prototypes, helping to give Britain a tactical edge in both air combat and night fighting operations. The sacrifices of the lost pilots were not in vain. Their experiences directly contributed to the refinement of aviation technology and operational doctrine. Yet the enduring mystery of certain losses ensured that the Channel's test missions retained an air of intrigue. Not all wreckage could be recovered, and some radar units, instruments, and aircraft components were never found. Historians and engineers continue to debate whether these gaps were caused by environmental factors, human error, or unknown mechanical failures. The lack of conclusive evidence for some disappearances added to the legend of the missions, elevating them beyond simple experimental trials into enduring symbols of wartime uncertainty and human courage. The Channel became a silent witness to both triumph and tragedy, holding within its depths the answers to questions that may never be fully resolved. In retrospect, the lost RAF test missions reveal a complex interplay of innovation, risk, and secrecy. They demonstrate the lengths to which Britain's military was willing to go to secure technological superiority, the courage required of its pilots, and the heavy price of experimentation in wartime. The missions also highlight the importance of careful engineering, meticulous testing, and an awareness of environmental variables, lessons that resonate even in modern aviation and military research. Yet amid the technical insights, the human story remains central. The bravery, dedication, and sacrifice of men who faced both the unknown and the unforgiving Channel, often without the certainty of return. By mid-1943, the narrative of these lost missions had become both a cautionary tale and a testament to ingenuity under pressure. While much had been learned about mechanical failures, environmental hazards, and operational risks, some pilots remained lost, and some questions remained unanswered. The Channel, ever cold and indifferent, held the secrets of the missing aircraft and their crews, a silent reminder of the thin line between innovation and disaster. The legacy of these missions is not only in the improvements they inspired but in the enduring human courage they represent, a blend of sacrifice, skill, and mystery that continues to captivate historians, engineers, and enthusiasts alike. In the end, the story of the lost RAF test missions over the Channel stands as a stark testament to the realities of wartime innovation. It is a chronicle of bravery tested against technology, environment, and enemy scrutiny, a narrative of men who flew into the unknown in service of their country. Some answers were found, some remained elusive, and all carry the weight of history. The Channel's cold waters keep their secrets well, but the legacy of the pilots, the aircraft, and the lessons learned endures, echoing through the annals of World War II as a powerful reminder of the courage and cost of pushing the boundaries of human and mechanical capability.